επόμενος ομιλητής θα μας μεταφέρει την εμπειρία από την Ευρώπη. Είναι ένας παλιός φίλος που συνεργαζόμαστε χρόνια. Είναι ο John Higgins, ο Director General του Digital Europe. Και ουσιαστικά έχουμε βιώσει τα τελευταία χρόνια πώς αλλάζει η Ευρώπη και πώς πρέπει και εμείς να αλλάξουμε ως χώρα αξιοποιώντας τεχνολογία. Dear John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yanis, for once again inviting me to speak at your fantastic conference. I'm not checking my emails. I'm trying to keep a record of a few notes I want to remember to say to you by looking at my mobile phone. So I'll try this, but I like innovation. I'll try this for the first time. You might know Commissioner Günther Oettinger. He's the German Commissioner for the Digital Economy and Society. And I've met him a few times, and as you might imagine, and he said to me recently, John, he said, Digital Europe is now as important as Business Europe. I was a little surprised by this. What do you mean? I'll explain to you what that means in a moment and why that I think is a significant comment from a European Commissioner. I want to spend my few minutes with you talking about three things. First of all, a little bit about the European context for digital. Then secondly, I want to talk about some of the European proposals for digital and how I am assessing those proposals. And the third thing is some practical ideas for accelerating Europe's digital progress, if you will. So, first of all, a little bit about Digital Europe, who we are, and back to this Commissioner Oettinger comment. So Digital Europe is the organisation like CEPE for Europe. Our members are the CEPEs of Europe from all the member states in Europe, but also the 60 or so largest tech companies are members in their own right. So that's fantastic for me because I have a superb network across every member state in Europe, and organisations like CEPE, most of the others aren't as good, I would say, but nevertheless, organisations like CEPE, but also it means I can draw on the fantastic technical, intellectual expertise that's there in the big companies who are present in Brussels as well. So I get the best of both worlds in a way. And now, what Günther Oettinger meant was, and I think this is a very encouraging sign, given that think about his background. He's not like Nelly Cruz, who many of you will have known was the previous digital commissioner. She was a sort of digital enthusiast. She was really sort of converted, whereas Commissioner Oettinger comes from an energy background, from a sort of German industry background, and no real instinctive enthusiasm for digital. But what Commissioner Oettinger realized was that Europe's future economic progress depended upon adopting digital fully. And he's really taken that to heart. And if you think about it, in Europe as well, those of you who follow these things will know that there are in fact a number of senior people in Europe focused on what digital can do for Europe. So first of all, we have the former Prime Minister of Estonia, Andrus Ansip, who is the Vice President for the Digital Single Market. And in this commission structure, the Vice Presidents are supposed to bring together as a sort of project all those who are involved in digital. So the other people are Commissioner Oettinger, as I said, but also Commissioner Bieńkowska, who's the Polish commissioner who runs what is now called DG Grow. It's like the sort of industry department, single market and industry. And together, these and other commissioners do form a team that's focused on Europe's digital progress. And I think we should remember to say that's actually good progress, because that sends a signal to member state governments, and I think we heard it earlier, it sends a signal to member state governments that digital is important for the economic and social progress of all European member states, for all economies now. And the first thing you have to see is that the leadership gets that. If the leadership doesn't get it, then that is a real problem for all of us and for all of our children too. So the first thing is the leadership gets it. And I think the European leadership does get that now. So we now have a lot of thinking going on in Brussels, in the capitals about, well, what can digital Europe, what can digital do for Europe, and what can digital do for European member states? And of course, once you get the focus on something like that, then lots of ideas come out of the woodwork. And it's very important, I think, to be able to test those ideas and say, are these ideas moving in the right direction? So we have devised, and we're still in the process of working through this, but we've devised some sort of simple tests that we use that enable us to measure whether these proposals are moving in the right direction. And let me give you an idea of what some of those tests are. So first of all, is a measure something that is instinctively protectionist? Because people will use these opportunities to create protectionist measures. So are these measures protectionist in the sense of, are they trying to protect an incumbent industry against change? Are they trying to protect a particular region? Somehow, is there an idea that, well, these are European industries and they need to be protected against American onslaughts following Snowden? You see some of this sort of thinking going into some of the proposals. So you have to, we want to use this sort of, that's one of our measures that we want to test. Now let's just look at a little bit about the sort of wider European context to understand why some of these things are coming in. I don't need to describe to you the challenges that Europe's facing, the broader challenges that Europe is facing. You'll be very familiar with the migration challenges. As a Brit, I'm very familiar with the challenges in the UK about the debate about Brexit. I see the sort of massive economic disparity, the youth unemployment problems across Europe. So Europe is facing some challenges. It's undergoing a period of change, and it's not surprising, therefore, that in this period of change, there are forces in Europe that are trying to hold back that change, to manage that change. So we have to check that the measures that are coming out of the European policy proposing machine, if you will, are heading in the right direction. So that's the first one I look at. Is this measure inherently protectionist in some way? And what I'm going to do in a moment is just take you through 2 or 3 of the proposals that are on the table being discussed and measure them up against that yardstick, if you will. So first of all, is it inherently protectionist? Maybe a second test is it a measure designed to deal with fears and unknowns that we don't need to deal with yet? We don't need to deal with because they're not properly articulated. So is it something that is trying to regulate the unknown? Is that a test we want to measure ourselves again? And then maybe finally, will this measure genuinely create jobs and growth? So using these things as a yardstick, let's just I want to pick 3 of the proposals that are on the table at the moment. And I would encourage you, those that are interested, to follow carefully the proposals that are being discussed and coming out of Brussels under a whole set of, it's really active at the moment, under a whole set of digital single market initiatives, but other initiatives too. And I know SEPE does a great job in following all these, but it's very active. Let's just take 3 of the things that are, if you like, in the works at the moment. Let's take the telecoms framework review and the general focus on improving the telecoms infrastructure. Well, the things that I like at the moment, I like to see the big push on 5G for Europe. I don't know how many of you, if any, were at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, I think it was last week. The car industry, the telecoms industry, and Gunther Oettinger got together and really pushed the idea of 5G for autonomous driving in the future. So I think this focus on an action plan for 5G is very important. I think also the ideas that we really have to encourage investment in the European telecoms infrastructure, is also focusing very much in the right direction. So I would say, even though the proposals we won't really see until later in the year, I think the direction of travel on the telecoms framework review at the moment is looking very positive. Let me move on to a second area, the debate about the role of platforms. Now, this is largely, I think, inspired by the fact that the economic models in many industries are being disrupted by the increasing use of platforms. And from some corners of Europe, you saw that this was creating some concerns. Now, I think that a lot of the discussion on platforms is actually driven by fear of disruption to existing industries, fear about protecting European industries against US incursion, if you will, into the value chain. Now, I don't think that this will necessarily lead to anything that in the end should worry us too much, but I think the tenor of the political debate there does not pass my tests. I think this is largely heading in the wrong sort of direction. So let's turn to another area, and that is the issue of digital skills. Now, the Commission is very focused on the fact that the skills of the European broader workforce is not adequate to deal with the digital revolution that we face. And so is very keen to work at a member state level and at a European level on improving the quantity and quality of the digital skills that are available to us in Europe. And again, CEPI has been very active here in Greece on that. To me, that one passes all the tests. That one definitely drives us in the right direction. It helps to improve jobs and growth. It pushes our use of digital in the economy and society in the right sort of direction. So I think that one is a plus. So, you know, there's lots of things that are going on. We have to keep applying these tests to them. Let me take one last one before we move on. So this is still about policy proposals, policy ideas that are coming out of the work at a European level. Let me turn to data as an example. So many of you will know that at the back end of last year, the three parties, the European Parliament, the Council and the Commission, agreed at last on a general data protection regulation. Move in the right direction for harmonization across Europe and the creation of a single market that many of you will feel is a good thing, I'm sure, because the larger the market that you can sell into, the better. So GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, taking us, in theory, in the right direction. But look at in more detail, you will see that member states have up to 50 different national provisions that they can enact. So I'd highlight to you in CEPE, really pay attention as the Greek government starts to implement the General Data Protection Regulation, that it does so in a way that is as allows you to be as innovative and job creating as possible. So look carefully at that. Let me move on then finally to some practical ideas, if you will. Practical ideas that we might think about that could take Europe in the right direction of making better digital progress. I've been chairing for part of the European Commission for the last couple of years a strategic policy forum on digital transformation. And one of the early statistics that's emerged, one of the early pieces of data that emerged was some research that showed that for Europe, 75% of the value, so that's 3/4 of the value to Europe of digital, was in the use of digital in its existing industries and enterprises. So transforming our existing utilities, pharmaceutical, automotive, aeronautical industries, that's where much of the value is to Europe. And of course, these are what we're talking about is mainly your customers. So these are transforming these industries is a large part of the value for Europe. And this policy forum focused in over the last 18 months or so on a number of areas where we felt real progress could be made. And I just wanted to finish with maybe 3 of those. So the first one is to better use cities and smart cities to drive digital transformation. And we weren't just making this up. We saw some great examples of Europe where the city authorities, the existing business community, and the digital community got together to drive forward digital transformation in the business sector. And one of the best examples we saw was the city of Dublin in Ireland, where the city authorities had really led and pushed that digital transformation. And then when we looked, we saw other examples around Europe where cities have driven the digital transformation because there's a natural clustering of the existing businesses, the digital sector, and the city authorities. Now, this is not about smart cities for their own sake, smart cities with smart transport and so on. It's not about that. It's about using the cities to push forward the digital transformation of existing industries. And part of the work that we'll be doing is producing a blueprint that we will be able to offer to cities to show them how to do that. Let me move to a second idea, the idea of data innovation. So it builds on the concept that I just talked to you about of now more harmonized treatment of personal data across Europe in the general data protection regulation. But what does that do for the opportunities for companies like yours to use data to create innovative business models, innovative propositions? What we think is that we're now going to be in a bit of a period of uncertainty in Europe because, yes, we have a general data protection regulation, but there are many things about the use of data that are still uncertain. And what we've already noticed is that some countries in Europe are forming groups to produce guidelines. And I think what could well happen is you will have, as we've already seen, we will have Dutch guidelines, we will have Finnish guidelines and these are guidelines on how you as a business could use data to create innovative new propositions, yet stay both within the law and within what's societally acceptable. Those of you who are using data in your business models will know that this is a fine line. You must be careful not to cross this line. So one of our propositions is we want some European guidelines on this so that there's a consistent approach to it across Europe. So we think that that will be a practical thing that we can do to accelerate the development of data-based innovative business models. And then one last thing, and I think you heard it earlier, the need to educate policymakers and regulators. We've been working with some ideas of digital boot camps. We started off with this idea of digital boot camps. And these are programs that you can take a regulator or a policymaker through to open their eyes to what digital could do for them. What do some of these new technologies mean so that they can then work through what that means in their job. And again, we'll be producing some blueprints that will be available throughout Europe to allow you, and I guess this is something that CEPE could take a lead on, to bring together regulators and policymakers to start helping them understand better the implications of new digital technologies for them. So look, I'll stop here. I've looked at the European context for digital. I've looked at some of these European proposals. There are many of them. It's really important that we have some good tests to measure whether they're taking us in the right direction. And I hope I've left you with some ideas, some practical ideas that I hope CEPE and you can pick up on to help drive forward the use of digital here in Greece as well as in Europe more broadly too. So with that, I'll say thank you for listening to me for a few minutes, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day. So thank you very much, Yanis.